Welcome to episode 400 of the Daily Objective, and thank you very much for your support and for reaching this number. So because this is an important moment, we thought we're going to have something different today from the usual topics. So we're going to discuss what are the things that objectivists should be talking more about, and actually things that they should be writing more about, if I understood well, because the mastermind behind today's topic is someone who has very recently written a book himself, Don Watkins. Hi, Don. And also we have Mark and Rucka, two of the pillars and the reasons why we've reached this number of episodes. So, Don, what do you have in mind about today?
Well, I mean, mostly I wanted to hijack the show for my own purposes, which is I have a list of books I want to read and I don't want to have to write them all. So I thought we could talk about them. But I also think it's a fun chance just to kick around some ideas that aren't really worked out territory in objectivism and kind of riff. So you guys have no idea what I'm going to say. And you're forgiven for whatever you do say as a result. But so I'll just start off with the first thing that I've really been I remember listening to like the old tapes and lectures, and you'd get kind of a standard question of, all right, well, objectivism tells you that, follow your knowledge, but what do you do when you have to act with uncertainty? And I was always unsatisfied with the answer because it was something like, well, you just go with, what seems most likely. And it seemed to kind of brush off acting in uncertainty as a big issue in life. And yet my view is it's a huge issue in life. That when it comes to philosophic knowledge and certain kinds of scientific knowledge and things like that, there's lots of areas where we do achieve certainty, but there's many, many cases where we're acting kind of in the face of probabilistic knowledge. So, I mean, take something like, what do you do in the face of a pandemic where there's certain kind of vague risks that aren't very well defined of the disease, possibly of a vaccine, of different kinds of decisions that you could make. And I think that's just a huge area for what does philosophy have to say? And it can't just be, well, what's like, follow what you is most likely, because that ignores differences in risk, right? Like something might be like 90% likely to be true, but if it's wrong, be a catastrophic risk. And yet something could be like 30% likely to be true, just to arbitrarily put numbers on these. And yet it's kind of a marginal risk if you go wrong. And so I think kind of more guidance on how to think about risk, probability, and statistics from a philosophic framework is definitely a book that I would like to see.
Yeah. So for those of you who remember the first web meetup of ARI Europe we did during the pandemic, we had Onkar Gate, and this was the topic, how to act in cases of uncertainty. And the answer seemed to be that you have to try to figure out what are the available information. But indeed, this is so. But one thing, Don, how can you get beyond this obvious answer, which is, well, you have the information that you need and you make the best of it? So what would be the deeper level that such an analysis would get you to?
Well, I don't know. That's part of the reason that I'd want to, hear philosophers really work through it. But I mean, one thing that's important is there's really smart people over the course of centuries now who have thought deeply about this kind of issue, and you'd want to really process that kind of knowledge. So I don't think it's something that you can just leap straight from philosophy to what should you do. I think you'd really have to understand the different ways that people have thought about risk and probability throughout history. And I'm sure that there's philosophers and probably Onkar who have thought about this at a deep level, but it's definitely not something that's in the literature. And it's something that I think is just really useful if you really want to be able to apply philosophy to real life. And that's my goal. And that's the kind of thing that I try to do, is make philosophy very practical for people. And it's just an area where I don't feel very clear or adept.
So how about we make it even funnier and we assign someone to write this, whether they know it or they like it or not. So who should write that book?
Oh gosh. I don't know who I would have to rope into that. Because there's a lot of objectivists who are, I think, like math wizards and really understand probability and so on. And then we have, a number of philosophy wizards, and I don't have a good sense of where those two paths intersect. But I don't know. I was going to try to come up with something funny to assign it to somebody, but I don't. I went blank.
Okay,
So maybe that's the book number 11 is how the Objectivist Guide to Humor. Rucka, maybe you could help us out with that.
I don't know about that. I'll try.
How's your voice, Rucka? Is all good?
It's not very good, but today is episode 400, so I had to be here.
Well, from now on, you can play the role of teller and just give us wonderful reaction shots that
Nice.
anybody who's listening to this in the treadmill and not watching it will go completely over their head.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, so the first book, the slot is available. We haven't assigned it to anyone. Can I go with the second suggestion?
Let's go for it.
So I think the main gap in the literature is a political theory of objectivism and a theory of a political revolution or a political transition. So this is a topic where, for example, you have stuff in Marxism, you have stuff in almost every political tradition, except of our own political tradition. And if you think about it, we admire the American Revolution, for example, or because it was what brought the ideas. We say it was the background was the ideas of the Enlightenment. All this is true. But without the American Revolution, these ideas do not come to form of a society. And yet there's very little work on how do you make a political revolution, or if you don't want the term revolution, how do you go to the next political regime? How do you get rid, for example, of the whole bureaucracies, of the whole different institutions of the states, on the long arms of the states? So to put it in Marxian terms, we are missing an objectivist Gramsci. Someone who is going to not only focus on the intellectual work that needs to be done, but how this intellectual work fits with the work of a political movement that is going to change society. So in terms of who is the person who is going to write this, the slot is going to be covered by me. But I want to get the reaction of Mark here, because Mark, you're someone who has been involved with politics. You have a vision that there could be a political party that tries to push these changes. So what is your view between political theory and political practice, and whether you agree that it is something that is very much missing from the literature?
I don't have that same observation, but maybe I just don't know about it as much as you. I think Marx seemed to be hyper focused on that, and his philosophy seems to be revolve around the politics of a particular place. And for objectivism, it's an aspect of the philosophy, but certainly not the whole of it. And so I do think more can be written, I think, about the morality of capitalism. I think what Rand set out was what gave us as a starting place is very good, but we need to change the argument out there, the moral argument. And I think we could probably take some lessons from Gramsci and from the Marxists out there who have done a lot of social research. They know how to tap the emotions of audiences. And my impression is that objectivists need to learn to appeal to the emotional lives of people. They need to push the same buttons that the Marxists can, perhaps find the same or similar slogans and sound bites, things that people can wrap their minds around really quickly and their emotions around really quickly, and generate, a feeling, a passionate feeling towards our ideas, as opposed to the slow creep that happens, once you intellectually adopt these things and they trickle down into your emotional life.
And I really like that you try to do these things, for example, with your short videos, the reality check. So let me throw another aspect on the table on this topic. I think this is something which is even missing in a way from Atlas Shrugged, because remember how Atlas Shrugged is finishing. So you have John Galt giving his speech, you have the people see the collapse, and yet at the end, at some point, spoiler alert, obviously, so put down the volume if you haven't read Atlas Shrugged. At the end, we have this general collapse, and at some point, Galt says, okay, now the road is paved, here we go back. but I found this always wanting. I found this missing something there. Like, what changed? Why is it that the complete collapse is going to open the way and not make the way even more inadmissible? So I think a theory and a strategy of political change is very relevant. And you can find it in other areas. For example, libertarians do have one. Hoppe has written a book on how East Germany should stop being so what do you do with a state property once, for example, society stops being a socialist society? So I would like to see, since we have better ideas and better minds, I would like to see something like that in objectives as well. Don, do you agree that this is something which is missing?
Totally. And I mean, I observed this the first time, not directly through Marxism, which I haven't studied as much as you or Mark have, but through when I was doing research into the kind of start and growth of the American welfare state. And for decades, the progressives, even though they didn't have political power, were developing they weren't just saying we need a welfare state, we need a welfare state. They were developing actual policy proposals, exactly like how would this function, how like like literally a plan that you could put into action tomorrow if anybody would listen. And two things that resulted in: number one, obviously, if you get the reins of power, you have your plan right there. But number two, it made it much more persuasive because we're trying to do something new. And here's what it would look like. This is the way that it would actually work in practice. Now, they don't really get how it would work in practice because there's all kinds of consequences that they're evading. But nevertheless, like, it is a really concretized version of what we're doing rather than just kind of a vague intention. And I think that that's crucial. And one of the things Greg Salmierius talked about with his work recently at the Salem Center is that's one of the major things that he wants to be working on, which is what would be real practical things that we could do to get on the road to freedom that would move us in the direction of freedom. And I think ultimately fleshing out all of these areas with actual policies and much more in terms of strategies for how you would do it. I think there's just a ton of work to do there. And I think that's going to be really crucial to being able, I mean, look at the, healthcare battle, right? Like the Republicans were really, I shouldn't say really, they were good at saying Obamacare is bad, right? But then they had a decade basically to come up with a plan that would move us in a somewhat better direction. And when they had the opportunity, they had nothing. So I think we need to move in a much more practical direction in that regard.
Yeah, but doesn't that mean reversing the ethics of the culture? Does that mean attacking it from an ethical point of view first?
Well, not first. I mean, I think that these are dual tracks, right? It's like you make a moral case for a concrete proposal and you can have steps. I mean, I think you can get people, you could imagine a society that thought instead of Obamacare, we could roll back some of the most disastrous healthcare policies. They wouldn't be for free markets. It would still be vulnerable. There'd still be a welfare state. But, it's not like everybody's egoist or we're socialists. Like there's a lot of this kind of middle ground that it's not sustainable in the long term, but you can kind of push people's better buttons, but you have to have a real plan. And then you have to have a good defense of it, because there were a handful of conservatives and libertarians who had better approaches to healthcare, for instance, but they could not defend it when somebody said, oh, so you're just going to let a person with a surgery die. Who needs a surgery die? If you can't answer the moral question, then yeah, the plans are worthless. But without the plans, your moral case doesn't stick as well, I think is the basic point.
And remember how powerful educationally a good political campaign can be. Remember the Pat Buchanan 92 campaign. We don't like the ideas, but it was a campaign that in many ways changed the discussion. Or remember the Ron Paul campaigns in 2008 and 2012, how they created a new generation of political activists, which unfortunately went completely, maybe the wrong path. But the lesson remains that an educational political campaign can change the discussion or can introduce new aspects in the discussion.
All right. So the next book, and this is kind of changing gears quite a bit from politics, is I would like to see, and I don't even know if this could make up a whole book, but certainly an area that I would really like to see worked out more in line with whatever we know scientifically is an integration of the objectivist free will with what we know about nature and nurture. Like what actually do people inherit from genetics? What is kind of how does environment impact people or tend to impact people? Basically something that situates the objectivist theory of free will in the whole literature that's developed on nature and nurture, a lot of which is garbage, but a lot of which is not. And I think in order to really be able to embrace free will, the people who are very scientific minded and who have really, spent years studying this literature and convinced by it, they need to have a sense of, well, how would this integrate if I'm going to accept your theory of free will? And so, and if you think about some of today's major debates, such as gender identity issues and so on, or the debate over IQ, I think that there's really good reasons why for objectivism to really be able to stake out a distinctive view in these debates, we'd want to have a sharper, clearer view of how to assess the evidence that claims, certain things are inherited, certain things are learned. And that's something that I'm sure there's people, I know, in fact, there's objectivist psychologists and things who have much more developed views than I do on this, but that's why I'd like to see them kind of wrap it all up in a nice, neat bow for me to go through and learn.
The difficult thing there would be A, how to explain the science in simple terms, and B, how to then link it with objectivism. So I know, for example, I know people, I think Lee is doing work on psychology, and obviously Gina is doing work on psychology. So the question is, how do you present, first of all, the current view in simple terms, and then add the objectivist take on it?
Yeah. I mean, these are tricky books to write, and there's a lot of tricky thinking that goes into them. I don't care if, I mean, look, my premise here is not that any of these books would be bought by anybody but me. So if it's a little technical, that's fine. But I think, I mean, if it was easy, somebody would have already done it, I assume.
I think tackling the issue of, I hate how good my voice sounds right now. I've been here like silent for days thinking I have no voice. Then I get on here. I sound like talk radio golden era. But I think the men issue. Okay, now I feel it going away. Okay. Anyway, the issue of mental health. I think if a book, were to address it in a way that the reader, the average layman, let's say, non-career intellectual, benefits from this book and finds it's yielding results and helps them introspect, but also reminds them that without concrete reality, these ideas and introspection are not, they're limited. Like it's about action and life and all that. If a book or books were to help people in reality, that could really help, the objectivists get a firm foot through the door of the field of psychology, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just a ton of work on really how do you implement a philosophy in your life. Like that's in fact what my next nonfiction book is doing, but it's a space where there's kind of infinite space for that to happen, because I think we have really great books on what does the philosophy say and why is it true, but how do you implement it? And then how does it integrate with a whole bunch of other knowledge that non-objectivists have developed on what's true and how to live? Like that's just a gold mine of opportunity.
And go on, Rucka.
Well, I was thinking about this when Mark was saying, we got to reach people's values. Like, I mean, there's, the fact that objectivism first is introduced through art is, worth noting. That without the art, it's hard for people to really get it, without it being kind of concretized that way and inspiring them that way. And also, it's hard for it to reach people, just philosophy written systematically has its limitations as far as reaching the world, I think. So.
And where do you draw the line between the need, for example, to understand your emotions and to understand mental health, and what my mentor at Kent, Frank Furedi, called therapy culture, which doesn't have to do specifically with therapy, but it's this idea that we understand everyday situations and problems through the language of mental illness. For example, you listen to people saying, I've got exams anxiety, or they use these terms where they have a very specific medical background to explain aspects of what used to be everyday situations or situations that you would expect to find in everyday life. So how do you not throw the baby outside with the dirty water when you criticize this tendency in today's society for people to not appreciating resilience, but at the same time understanding that your mental health and understanding your emotions is a crucial stuff of your well-being?
I think depicting such a person in art is a great way to depict that. There you go. You like that? There's my answer. Also, write a book about it if you think it's so important. There you go. There it is.
Well, among us, there's only one person who has written fiction. So, Don, you realize after this episode, there's going to be more work for you.
Oh, I hope so. It's thankfully going really well. Well, speaking of fiction, so here's another book that I've long thought needs to exist. And that is, what is the first thing to read after you finish Atlas Shrugged? In other words, I finish Atlas Shrugged. I'm really interested in Ayn Rand. What's the thing that really brings me into objectivism? And I think there's good nonfiction books. I think my book will be good. It doesn't assume you've read Atlas Shrugged, but if you've read Atlas Shrugged, you also want a book that helps you understand Atlas Shrugged a whole lot more. So it couldn't just be like a nonfiction book on objectivism. You'd want something that really helps you bring out in a way that some of the book clubs that, like, I think Greg Salmieri did one that's online, and there's been other ones that have been, better and worse. You'd want something that would kind of bring you into nonfiction, show how the ideas apply to life to an extent, help you unravel the fiction, and help situate Ayn Rand's ideas with other ideas that are live in the culture. And I think that would be something really magnificent, because there's a lot of people who sat down Atlas Shrugged and go, that was great. And they never read another thing by Ayn Rand, not because they don't like her, but because it doesn't occur to them that, it's like when I read, and we might have talked about this, or maybe I talked about it in your Ron Brooks show, somewhere I talked about the idea of, like, people read Tolstoy and they don't feel like, all right, now I have to read everything by Tolstoy and study like Tolstoy's way of life. They go, oh, I read Tolstoy, that was great. And then they go on with their lives. I think a lot of people do that with Ayn Rand. And I think one thing that would help make that transition is a book written especially to help people take that next step.
That's a great idea, because quite often, for example, you watch a movie you like, Apocalypse Now, for example, then you try to find ideological readings on the movie. So the same could happen with Atlas Shrugged. Was it Nathaniel Branden or Kelly? I don't remember, someone who wrote the Moral Revolution of Atlas Shrugged or something like that. I've read it years ago, so I don't remember if it's good, or is this something like what you have in mind? So explaining, so would the book be specifically about Atlas Shrugged? Like it would mention it in the title or something?
That would be my vision. So the book you're referring to is Who is Ayn Rand, that he and Barbara Brandon wrote. And there's some good things going for it. I do think it was helping people kind of... Not the
one I had in mind. It's actually Kelly, and I think it's called The Moral Revolution. But again, I don't remember. I read it
that was really bad.
I wasn't in a position to. Indeed, it's Kelly. I wasn't in a position to No, it is Nathaniel Branden. Indeed, it is Nathaniel Branden.
Yeah, that was one of that. So the book has 4 essays. It has 3 essays by Branden, including that one, and then and one on psychology, one on art. And then it has one, a biographical sketch by Barbara Brandon. And so I think directionally that's right. You wouldn't do it that way today. And there's like many I shouldn't say many problems with it. It's just not written in a way that I think audiences would respond to today. Plus, the authors are not exactly in a position to join us in promoting Atlas Shrugged. But that kind of idea of something specifically to that audience that's trying to do something similar, which is help them make that transition of, there's real depth to these ideas and they're really meant to apply to life. Because some readers of Atlas Shrugged really didn't see that, particularly in the late 50s. Like, it was, okay, that was an interesting book, but Ayn Rand wasn't yet known as a philosopher trying to give you guidance to life. I mean, I think you'd have to be pretty thick-headed not to see that, but apparently it was a thing.
How about you and me, we write this together? I enjoy consuming books that are on other books. So I've read many of them. So ranging from Batman to Fight Club to many of these things. So,
but we'll talk.
Okay. We call dips on it. Anything
All right.
else? Any other suggestions?
For books?
Yes.
Is this, does Don, do you have more suggestions, or is this kind of like
I have a bunch more, but I want to hear what you guys have in your mind, and we'll see if there's ideas even better than mine.
how about I Am Justice Miami? So actually,
I have no desire to go to Miami, but again,
oh well, that makes one of you, isn't that where everybody's going according to what I've heard? Anyway, I know. Anyway, I actually had an idea. I know this is kind of a last minute topic for the show. The Man in the High Castle, I think, is poorly executed. They turned it into kind of this sci-fi thing where they're crossing the two dimensions. The one where the Axis won, and this one where the Allies won World War II. And
is the book different? Because that's the part I didn't like as well. And it's
I don't know. I haven't read the book, but I saw a lecture by the author of the book, and he is a crazy person who actually believes the book. He believes he's part of the resistance who is helping fight the bad guys in whatever dimension they are, and sees an equivalence between America bombing Japan and the Nazis, purging Europe. So he's a crazy person. He actually believes that book is reality. So
the book is crazy different from the TV show, by the way. Yeah.
In what way? Could you summarize it?
Without spoilers, because I've been wanting to read the book.
He wants to read it. All right. Anyway.
Well, I stopped watching after season 2.
It picks up later. I think you miss.
Well, yeah. You can read the Wikipedia page if you don't want to read the whole book, but they just went in completely different directions from what I understand.
So I want, if the book is sci-fi like the TV show, at least, then I would like to see the issue of what if the Axis won World War II, like what would the world look like? I think that would be a great book if someone could do it well. I don't think it was, based on what I know, The Man in the High Castle is a missed opportunity. So there's my suggestion.
See, I think the objectivist version of it, though, would be really boring, which is there'd be a lot of murder and then the societies would collapse and America would have never gotten taken over, even if they had lost. It would have been more like, all right, you guys stay over in your corner of the world. But who knows?
Is it inconceivable that the Axis get, invade and take over at least part of this continent?
I think it's inconceivable. They wouldn't be able to sustain it. Yeah, and if they won, knowledge would come to a screeching halt at some point, and whatever brought them over across the Atlantic would no longer be present there. And
I agree. I agree.
And they couldn't take over 300 million, Americans, many of whom are armed themselves. And
Ayn
Rand kind of did write this, though, right?
That's what I was going to say.
Basically.
So I was going to say between before Anthem. So it would be like between the end of World War II and Anthem, there would be this period where you could have some interesting plots and people like, the good and evil sort of contending. So someone could do it, maybe.
And I don't know.
I'd read that.
I don't know if I'm contributing any value to this, because I'm sort of going to jump off the mental health bandwagon that was mentioned earlier. I think that's very important, that application of objectivism as a how to live. I think we could use more of that, and with some emphasis on the value of emotions, because I think I see a lot of objectivists disvalue emotions or push them away in a way that they shouldn't, because it's very valuable information. Your emotions are a very important part of your life, and it's the one thing that these political movements that you were referring to, Nikos, earlier, really appeal to. And so I think we should find a way to respect the emotional life of human beings and integrate the value of emotions into our rational superstructure.
So you may, in a way, link it also with self-development.
Yeah.
And I'd really like to see stuff like that in that genre that addresses the unique challenge that younger people are under today. I know one of the concerns near and dear to your heart, Mark, is cyberbullying. But there's a whole bunch of questions of how a young person is to conduct themselves in a world where every mistake that they make is on file forever, where, they're basically in the public eye from the time they're an adolescent. Like, I think it is a universe very different from the one that at least most of the people on this video grew up in. I was on the cusp of it. It was just starting to happen. And thankfully, most of that stuff didn't survive and, isn't Googleable today. But like, that to me just seems an enormous sort of burden. I think philosophy can't give you the whole answer, but can sure as hell help you a lot in dealing with those kinds of challenges.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, and that's related to one of the other books I want to see, which is Objectivism and Parenting. And I don't think that there's the objectivist approach to parenting, but I'd like to at least see something that grappled with, the kinds of issues that come up and different approaches that one could take. And I'd like to see different objectivists with different schools of thought, arguing about it. But I think it's a really underexplored area. And, in the 60s, a lot of objectivists weren't having kids. Today, most objectivists I know do have kids, or even if they don't have them, they like them. They interact with them. They're curious about, well, how, should one raise kids? So I think that's an infinite well. It's very related also to education, where we have done a lot of work and people are actually implementing a lot of ideas in really exciting ways. But I think that's a potential treasure trove. And, not just kind of standard advice for how you raise kids, but, how do you raise kids in today's unique context? How do you raise unique kids that don't fit the mold, right? Like my kids, put it like they didn't respond to Montessori or a lot of the traditionally effective advice that you get from like Ganot, which is very popular among objectivists. So I think that's a really cool area that I've heard objectivists comment on, but there's not really been a lot of writing apart from education.
Is that a Lisa Van Dam type of project, perhaps?
Well, I mean, Leonard Peikoff has his book adapted from a talk on education. Lisa's run her school, which, has kind of the practical implementation of those ideas. And then a lot of what the people at Higher Ground Education are doing, which is kind of taking Montessori and expanding on it and applying it. And there's other objectivists who are in the Montessori world who have done some kind of cool work. And then I'm forgetting about the guys at Mystery who did Mystery Science, which is a scalable, rational science curriculum. So lots of cool stuff in the education sphere.
Wow.
And now the Daily Objective also has a mascot. So
yeah, this is Cody.
Hi, Cody.
My cat was just around my ankles.
Yeah, Cody doesn't believe in boundaries.
Bring the other cat up as well, then. Let's have all the cats of the Daily Objective.
Cat videos perform well, they say. I have another book idea now, kind of a little bit in the same spirit as parenting. Maybe like people who recently sort of fell in love with Rand's philosophy, kind of helping them not. Maybe it's inevitable that they're going to have sort of a rationalistic phase. But to help them through that, or to help minimize the damage, by rationalistic, I mean, for those who aren't familiar with the jargon, like kind of like taking Ayn Rand's like conclusions from the end of her life and treating them suddenly like they're obvious and like they're primary, and you almost don't even need reality. You just have this philosophy to replace reality with. Leonard Peikoff goes deep into this in his Understanding Objectivism series. So I guess there is a book. It's the transcription of an Understanding Objectivism, but maybe it can be sort of written in a way that's geared once more to a new generation of readers.
And a good format for this book would be something like the 100 Voices. So you would take many, many different objectivists, and each one will write a very short part in terms of mistakes that you can make, or misunderstandings, or and there would be some big chapters, let's say more theoretical chapters on what is rationalism, but the bulk of the book would be our experiences on how as a newbie, the philosophy changed our minds on some things, but also what would be the things to avoid. So it wouldn't just be a negative one, it would be a positive one and then parentheses and what not to do. Or
well, there was a series of books called Letters to a Young ... There was a Letters to a Young Conservative. Christopher Hitchens did something like Letters to a Young Contrarian, I think. And there was a series of that, and I think there definitely could be something like Letters to a Young Objectivist. That's similar to an idea I had. My idea was more theoretical, but it's along the same lines, which is Leonard Peikoff gave a book, Objectivism Through Induction, and I'd like to see a book that covered every principle of objectivism in that way. It would be a gargantuan task to write, but it's one of those things that once it was written would just be, I think, potentially transformative in terms of people's ability to firsthand understand the ideas. It's serving, I think, a different, more advanced purpose than what you guys are talking about. But I love both those ideas.
So how would this be different from the book you're currently writing, Don?
Well, the book I'm currently writing is basically like, it doesn't assume any knowledge or interest in objectivism. So it's basically like, in effect, my guide to life, which is philosophy with more practical advice on how to implement the cornerstones of a rational ethics. And I think they're overlapping because hopefully I'm giving people a non-rationalistic way of doing it, but it doesn't explicitly address some of the things that would come up for somebody if they've read Ayn Rand's novels, because part of the difficulty that you have when you first discover Ayn Rand's novels is, what is part of the novel qua novel? What is part of Ayn Rand's personal preferences that are, how she's going to concretize a person living by her philosophy, and what is inherent in living by the philosophy? Like, what is the way that something looks in art is going to be different from the way that it looks in real life. And I always love, there's a story Leonard tells where, he says, if John Galt went on a date, it'd be flawless. He'd pop the champagne, pour everything effortlessly. If I did it, I'd be fumbling, dropping things all over. And Ayn Rand said that could happen to a real life Galt too. The difference is, in life, you'd ignore it. In art, you omit it. And that kind of perspective of, I'm not to implement, to live like the heroes in Atlas Shrugged is not to try to act like them in a role-playing sense. It's a much more subtle sort of thing. And I think guidance to help people make that distinction would be really cool.
Okay,
Mark,
so
hold on. Mark, would you include the fumbling? Like, I know you have a bit of a different view of art. Would you include that?
I wouldn't ignore it. I think it would be a rather fun punctuation point to an evening.
Mm-hmm. There's something charming about the fumbling.
I would laugh. I would enjoy it. It wouldn't be something to brush aside.
Cool.
Okay, so does anyone check? Do we have super chats, or shall we proceed to Clubhouse unless there's any?
A lot of super chats.
Oh, okay. Do you want to go through them, or do you have a weak voice and I should?
My voice is weak, but I'll start. Okay, I'll read one.
It sounds strong. It sounds strong, though, Rucka.
I know his weak voice is that just breaks my heart.
It hurts. It kind of hurts, and but I'm kind of relieved, because if my voice sounded like, if it felt and sounded great, then I'd be like I've been playing hooky the last week. Robert with $4 says, "Boom, $4 for 400 episodes. Who's with me?" Jonathan Honig, the conspicuously absent 400 episode host. At least the least he could do, send us $9.99. Louise with £10 or euros rather. No, that's pounds. Thank you.
Pounds.
Regina then with €4 says 400. Thanks, guys. Jonathan Honig with $4.99 says, how about a book that really explores the whole idea of benevolent and malevolent universe premise? How about
that would be really cool. I try to bring that up in my book a little bit, but it's one of those things that I think is a lot more there's a lot of ideas that you get in kind of like nugget form from Ayn Rand, and that aren't really fleshed out, though people have started to flesh them out. I mean, if you think about the work that Gene Moroney has done with motivation by love versus motivation by fear, which is really 2 paragraphs in Atlas Shrugged, in Galt's speech. And yet you could view the whole of objectivism through that sphere. And I think it's there's a lot of stuff like that, but certainly benevolent, malevolent universe premise, I think, are woefully unintegrated for most people, probably myself included.
Yeah. Philosophical Zombie Hunter with £5 says there are many missing books for applying objectivism to business, to manufacturing, and to software development.
For business, check out Why Businessmen Need Philosophy, edited by, my mind is freezing.
I think Richard Ralston edited the second edition.
Oh, okay.
And Richard and Debbie Gatte, maybe.
Yes, indeed. And the opening essay is by, and again, I'm drawing a blank, he's in the board of the Ayn Rand Institute, and he was, okay. Anyway.
John Allison,
yeah. So my mind is freezing with everything, but check out Why Businessmen Need Philosophy. It's also available on Kindle on a reasonable price.
And he suggested, or she, Zombie Hunter suggested, software developers. Now, Objectivism for Coders, I think, could really change the world. If Silicon Valley started reading that, Go Battle is won. Marilene with $5 says, how much can a person overcome nature versus succumbing to it? But nature is a real thing, and you can nurture yourself. It's actually easier for me to use that accent. She said you can nurture yourself. Okay. Yes, you can. And it helps. But also, you getting nurtured by the people around you is a real need. That's it. There's a thing young objectivists might not understand. They think, oh, a true objectivist is like Howard Roark in work mode his whole life. But if you
nurture yourself too much, you'll go blind.
That's what my grandmother said as well. Yeah, and I mean, objectivism as a coping mechanism is a real, I mean, it can be a real thing, like missing out on life and thinking, well, but I'm a real objectivist, this world wouldn't understand.
It's like this meme with a guy who enters the party and everyone's having a good time. It's like, they don't know I'm an objectivist.
Yes, Jonathan Honig with $4.99 says, how about a book about Rand's views on sexuality?
Yeah.
One of you can take that one. I am not touching that one with a 10-foot pole.
Ellen Kenner's book on romance is good with Deloc, but particular on sexuality, like masculinity, femininity, that would be good unless, as long as someone is miles and miles away from anything that can get him canceled, that would be good.
Yeah, I mean, that's a selfish path to romance. This is a great example of like applied objectivism or writing with an objectivist background. But like any book, any philosophical book, without real life experience, you're kidding yourself thinking you understand something. Philosophy is only worth the paper it's written on until you live. I think. Marilene with $2 says, for me, it was Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. Speaking of what to read after Atlas Shrugged. Lyran Brown with $20 says, Rand beautifully depicted heroic struggles in a mixed economy. I'd love a book about life in an established objectivist society. The characters would consider solutions obvious, but would be shocking to many in current times. Yeah, kind of like the inverse of Man in the High Castle, sort of, or of Anthem. Kind of like, well, what would a good world look like? And it's so hard to contemplate. I mean, even in this mixed economy, so many good things have come about technologically that were impossible to contemplate a few decades ago. So, but yeah, that would be a very cool thing. Marilene with $10 says, how about something for those who think there are shortcuts and the world should be full objectivists by now? Someone's been hanging out on Facebook. We can do more, but it's not an easy process. I agree with Mark about mental health.
So no one shares much of my enthusiasm about something on politics, because even if the world was full of objectivists by now, again, it's the cultural hegemony and political hegemony. The line is not as straight as we might think. So another vote for the book on politics.
2 votes for Nikos on his politics book.
Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, I say, like, the revolution will not be televised, like change happens slow and largely through art, people's values. They don't even realize they're changing. Their kids are picking up values through art and through culture. Like the change will be very gradual, in my opinion.
Yeah, but then you realize
And
we
then
either need a
fast.
revolution or we need transhumanism. I don't want to die and not have seen this world. So either we need to live till 300 or we need to, or maybe 500, or we need to accelerate the course of history a bit.
Bookmark transhumanism, because we did an episode about that and I've had so many more thoughts about it since then. We should do another one.
I was very surprised you weren't excited, not with the transhumanist movement, which is weird, but with the idea of transhumanism.
What? No, it was going to Mars or something that I didn't want to do. I said, I'm busy. I don't have time to go to a red rock somewhere.
Well, I think you were not even excited about freezing yourself till we can live forever. But anyway.
Oh, yeah. Everyone I know is here. What am I going to do in the future? What?
Make new friends. I don't
know. Make new friends? A bunch of little kids. They're not even born yet. What am I going to do? All right. I don't even
unfreeze you, and the first thing they say is you're still canceled.
Yeah, I don't even like today's young people. Today's Generation Z to me aren't uncool. What am I going to do with their great grandchildren?
Oh, yeah. Imagine the millennials of millennials of millennials. Oh, my God.
Forget it. All right. Enric with 1999 says, with the science of CRISPR, mRNA, and space development, there's narrative opportunities for projecting futures where authors' philosophies could come through different than the dystopian current literature.
Yeah, I think utopian literature is an interesting kind of category. There doesn't seem to be that much of a market for it today, which is, I think, a revealing cultural sign. But in part, it's hard to write well, because if you think the whole thing with the utopia, if you're treating it as a real utopia, not in the traditional way where the utopia is secretly dystopian, it's the whole thing is it's stripping away conflict, right? So you have to figure out, like, what's the conflict that's actually going to make the story interesting and so on. But I shouldn't even tread in those waters, because I don't read or write fantasy or sci-fi, so I'm the last person to have strong opinions on how it can be done. But the little taste of it we get in Atlas Shrugged is incredible. So
you don't read Heinlein? You haven't read Robert Heinlein?
No.
You might find his work interesting.
By the way, for those of you who found the idea of an alternative universe where the Nazis has won, Fatherland is good. By what's the name of the guy? Not the film, because it was kind of weird B movie. Fatherland. Okay, novel. Robert Harris. So what happens in Fatherland is so the Nazis have won, and we find ourselves in the everyday life of Berlin in the 1960s. So I definitely recommend it. It's a very good alternative history novel. And Robert Harris is generally good, but this is perhaps his best one.
Someone in the chat brought up Fatherland on HBO. Is that the one you're saying not to bother with?
Oh, no, I haven't watched in HBO. I have. There was a movie in the 90s, a cheap production about Fatherland, which I'm not saying it's bad, but go read the novel. So it's perhaps the best alternative history novel, and it's the one that set the standards for alternative history, as far as I know, because it's a genre that I enjoy. By the way, if people are big in alternative history and you've read anything good with an alternative history where communism has won, because I haven't found anything like that. I found an alternative history where the South has won the Civil War, where the Nazis have won, but not one where the communists have won. Put it in the comment. I would really appreciate it.
That's because the communists have won, Nikos.
So true.
Okay.
There is, yeah. Okay. One more. Marilyn with $5 says, "Oh my God, I didn't mean you could do all the nurturing yourself. How sad." Yeah, that sounds like the types of people. Like I said, they use objectivism as a defense mechanism. So they don't have to live. They don't have to bother. They don't have to leave the house. They can just sit around nurturing themselves all day, stroking their own ego. Anyway, that's all for me. Any other final ideas or comments?
I had the fun in today's episode. So I never enthused when there's a ceremony episode, because we're gonna tap ourselves in the back. But this was good, so kudos to Don for coming up with the idea.
Yes, thank you, Don. All
Thanks,
right,
Don.
I'll jump over to announcements now. At 9 p.m. UK time, it's HBTV with Harry Binswanger. The topic is free will, the vaccine against pandemics of the soul.
Nice.
There it is. All right. That's coming up at 9 p.m. UK time, whatever that means to you. Today is Monday, so isn't there also Methods and Madness, or is that not happening today? I guess it's not, because it's not in my announcements. But that's all. Thank you. Happy 400 episodes, everybody. And we agree that, if the bad guys won World War II, it would all fall apart at some point. I didn't mean to suggest a 1,000-year Reich like Hitler was going for. I just meant until it all falls apart, there could be a lot of plot twists.
What we need is an alternative history where it wasn't where it was Ayn Rand's heir who went bad instead of some 2-bit other philosopher. And I don't know. I'm thinking of just like, I have this desire to write the most insider novel that would appeal to nobody except for objectivists.
Oh, believe me, I've had TV show ideas about like Terminator meets ominous parallels type, like where like the machines, in order to hurt humanity, are going back in time to kill, let's say, Aristotle, or to embolden Kant and protect him, and like so like it turns into this philosophical game of time travel and assassination. So I definitely would love that very niche type of sci-fi.
Okay, so we have some like 8 minutes, at least myself, for Clubhouse. So let's see what our audience thinks in terms of book ideas. Okay.
All right,
you guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.